I want to talk about the Mount Zion excavations, plural. 2 years ago, I spoke about the excavation that Shimon Gibson and I had begun in 208, and some of you I know heard that, and some of you seen that excavation. But Mount Zion is really a much grander plan, and it has much to do with understanding Herodian Jerusalem, we call it, or as I say to my students, Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. We need an acronym for that, right? Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. What would that be? You figure it out. And to talk about a whole comprehensive understanding of this area of the ancient city of Jerusalem. So I'm going to show you quite a few maps, aerial photos, drawings. Some of you have been to Jerusalem, so you'll be able to kind of orient yourself pretty easily. But fortunately, two of the things I'm going to cover here were in Bar Magazine, and this is one of them. I just went ahead and clipped the first page of this from my website. This is at my university website, the Jewish Roman World of Jesus. It has over 500 pages of material. It's what I use in my courses. In the summer of 1990, I returned to Jerusalem. I'd been there in 79 as a kid. Some of you read the Jesus Dynasty. I opened the book with that 17-year-old experience, doing the Holy Land tour with my family that I think some of you have done. And that was in 1963. And then in 79, I led a tour. I knew nothing. I don't know why I led it, but I led it like a church tour, a church group, and showed them what I did know, which wasn't a lot then. So I didn't go back to Jerusalem. I was getting my PhD and doing textual studies. As I stayed in libraries at the University of Chicago for about 10 years. And I didn't go to the Middle East, but Joe Blankensop and others that I knew at Notre Dame, where I eventually taught, kept saying, you need to get over and, see the lay of the land, walk the places, and, and get your hands dirty. And I'm not an archaeologist, so in the 1990s I started going. And I carried this issue of Bar with me. It was July of 1990, and I was absolutely taken with this article. Do any of you know this article by Father Bargil Pixner, now the late Bargil Pixner? You got to go read it. I mean, you're going to understand my lecture 100% better after you go home and read this, because I'm going to show you two of his articles. And notice it was the cover. So, the cover story, Church of the Apostles found on Mount Zion. His argument was that what we call Christian Mount Zion, I'll explain in a minute. There are 3 Mount Zions. So get your Mount Zion straight. This is number 3. Christian Mount Zion, where the Dormition Abbey is today, where we're digging today, and when we talk about the Mount Zion excavation. Pixner believed, he was audacious enough to believe, that the essential structure, the lower floors at least, of the original synagogue of James, the brother of Jesus, let's call it the synagogue of the apostles, was still preserved today. You probably know it as the upper room if you're a Christian, or if you're Jewish, the tomb of David, because it's the same space. It's the most amazing site to go to in Jerusalem. Every Jewish tour goes to the tomb of David, and every Christian tour goes to the upper room, and they're just a few feet apart because it's the same building. Christians are upstairs, they probably like that, and the Jews are downstairs, right? But they're remembering a spot, and we'll talk about that. So read this article, and then in 1997, anyway, I wanted to finish. In 1990, I walk up to Mount Zion with that article, knock on the door of the Dormition Abbey. Is Father Pixner perhaps around? I had the magazine, I was ready to connect. And he was so gracious, and it was the beginning of a 20-year friendship. We were very close. He considered me, I guess, like a son. And he had such a wonderful personal history. I could go into that for 30 minutes. He fled the Nazi army because he was a conscientious objector and had to hide in the woods. He finally walked to the Allied side and ended up in northern Italy, and finally ended up in Jerusalem. If you know his books, the Fifth Gospel, which is what is the fifth gospel? You thought it might be the Gospel of Thomas, right? No, the fifth gospel, according to Pixner, is the material evidence. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then what you can see on maps, what you can visit, what you can learn. And then he has another book called Jesus in Galilee. Highly recommend those two books. They're wonderfully illustrated with maps and so forth. So this was Father Pixner's lifetime work. Then in 1997, he scored again. Cover story and bar, Jerusalem's Essene Gateway, the community where the community lived in Jesus' time. He had the argument that the early Christian community, the Judeo-Christian community, the successors of Jesus, led by James, his brother, lived on Mount Zion. And here's this beautiful shot of Mount Zion on the cover. And notice who helped him with the article. I sincerely thank Professor James Tabor for helping him. He wrote it in German. It was very dense, very German. And Herschel said, Tabor, put it in bar style, please. So you know what bar style has to start with questions and lead to things. And so I was very happy to help him write that article. I want to mention one thing. At the bottom here, I don't know how good your German is, but some of you certainly could read German. You can get this art. This is a 200-page scholarly version of all of Pixner's theories by Dr. Riesner, who's a German scholar that's a devotee, University of Tübingen. So what I want to talk about is how are Pixner's theories holding up? Here's what I want you to notice. If you can you see this barely colored area? That's supposed to be pretty much orange. The city today, when you visit Jerusalem, this would be the Temple Mount, is like this. See that, where I'm tracing? It's supposed to be orange colored. None of this you would consider part of the city. Well, look at the fort. This northern part wasn't even there in the time of Jesus, right? None of this, none of this, none of this. So you had the Temple Mount, and then this was the northern wall. Here is the city of David, the Tower of David, Jaffa Gate, right? You with me? And you go down and around. So look, Mount Zion, where we're digging, Area E, where we're digging right now, is the center of Herodian Jerusalem. People pass it today and they say, what are you digging by the side of the road there? Is that all you could get? And we say, we're actually digging, forget this Turkish wall. Turkish wall's got to go, right? We're in the center of Herodian Jerusalem. Could you imagine a better place to dig in any ancient city? Go to the center of town, find out what's there, and then orient yourself. Now, we're talking about this area right here. I'll give you lots of examples. Boy, this is bad, because that's very easy to read on my computer here. So I'll look at my screen. We're going to mainly talk about the Essene Gate, because I can't do all of Pixner, but the Essene Gate leads to everything else. Because if Pixner has correctly identified the Essene Gate, then he's identified what he calls the Essene Quarter, meaning an area of Jerusalem where the Essenes lived, the group that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. And if Jesus eats the Last Supper in the Essene Quarter, then he's allying himself with some Essene followers, which is very significant. I have a separate lecture that very similar to what Charlesworth does. 10 major parallels between the Jesus movement and the Qumran community. Like communal meals, baptismal initiation, Council of 12, Inner Council of 3, on and on, lots of parallels. But I don't think Jesus was an Essene. But did he have Essene connections, sympathizers, admirers? And according to Pixner's theory, which we're going to talk about, he did. So this is so well accepted now that in the most definitive guide to the Holy Land, the venerable Oxford Archaeological Guide, some of you have this, written by Jerome Murphy O'Connor, he has on page 119 the Essene Gate. He has a whole section on the Essene Gate, and I'm not going to actually read it, but just to show you that it's in print. So Pixner's theory has been completely accepted by the major scholars. That is, where he says the Essene Gate was, people are saying, yes, that's correct. And I'm going to question that today, and that's what the lecture is essentially about, is how does it hold up after 20 years and the whole theory that goes with it. If you go to almost any Bible map today, like that Oxford map right there, even though you couldn't see it, right there is the Essene Gate, and in the little legend that's right there, but you can't see it. Yeah, it's right there. It lists all the little points. It says Essene Gate. Look in the back of any Bible. If you have a map of Jerusalem, I bet you anything it'll have Essene Gate. So Pixner's one. You get in the Oxford Archaeological Guide to the City, and you get in the Oxford maps. And Pixner was the one who discovered this. He said this is the Essene Gate. Now, what's the point about the Essene Gate? The Essenes had special laws of purity. They believe that it's a sin to have sex in the city. They say that in the scrolls, in the holy city of Jerusalem, and to defecate in the city. You have to go outside the camp. Now, as far as having sex, the celibate community doesn't have sex at all. But in every town and village, there are Essenes, according to Josephus, who also marry and bear children, but they shouldn't live near the temple of the sanctuary, because sexual defilement is understood. Not that sex is dirty or anything like that, but it doesn't mix with the holy, right? The holy is the temple, and so a woman who's menstruating or a seminal emission or blood or death, anything like that, a bleeding sore, is going to keep you out of the holy precincts. They extended that to all of Jerusalem. And so Pixner's theory was that right here, this is the hill of Mount Zion. This is where we're digging. By the way, I think that's probably Herod's Theater right there. You see the terraces there? Now, if you went there, this was taken in 1920. If you went there today, you would just see rows and rows of Arab housing up in, this is that very contested area. There's the Dung Gate, south of the Temple Mount. So you couldn't see the contour. You can't tell anymore because it's so congested with buildings. But you can see from this aerial shot, we're digging right there, and I'm talking about this as Mount Zion. So there are three Mount Zions. The original Mount Zion was the city of David right here, called the Ophel, and then Mount Zion, the Temple Mount, and this is Christian Mount Zion. So it's the little southwest corner. This is what it looks like in a badly faded picture that I won't be able to use. There's a cemetery here that's called the Gobat property, G-O-B-A-T. It's the Anglican cemetery. See the tombstones? You can at least make those out. And if you walk onto the property, down to the end and down, there's a gate. John Hoffman, you told me you'd been there. Anybody been and seen the Essene Gate? You have to get a key to go. But it's right about right there. It is where Bliss and Dickey had found the threshold of the gate, and then Pixner dug it and exposed it, and you'll see in that article. Now, don't get confused here, because I want you to begin to recognize Mount Zion. Lori said I had too many pictures. She says, you had too many pictures of Mount Zion, it's confusing. But after these 5 pictures, you're going to, oh, I got it. Okay, Temple Mount, right? There's the Golden Dome, there's the Alaska Moss, here's the Dung Gate. You come along the modern road, here's the Turkish wall. Pretend that's not there, because in Herodian times, the wall's going way down here, right? We just saw that. This is where we're digging now. You climb up Mount Zion. It's the southwest hill. It's the highest point of Jerusalem. We're talking about this area here. Here's the cemetery. There's the gate. So if you haven't seen it, it's not on the beaten path of the tourists. But this would have been, going around the wall, how you would have entered the city in Herodian times. Remember, see that? Can you tell that that's a brown, that's a soil there? I'm going to refer to that later as the Greek property. It's behind the Dormition Abbey. People don't go back there much. Look at that. There's no buildings. From here to here, right where I'm, no buildings. On top of Mount Zion, there are no buildings. What does that tell you? What does it tell me? It tells me this needs to be the site of a major excavation. And that's where we're headed. We're right here, digging, right there. We can't dig here. That's the Dormition Abbey. Why is it called the Dormition Abbey? Dorme means what in Latin? Sleep. To sleep. Mary fell asleep there. Mary's buried supposedly in 3 different places. But the tradition is she was died on Mount Zion. Why would she die on Mount Zion? Because James, the brother of Jesus, Simon, Jude, the other brothers, and the sisters, and the mother are all together on the day of Pentecost in the book of Acts with the 11 apostles, later 12. And Mount Zion becomes the headquarters, according to Pixner. Now, here's a Google map. Same thing again. I want you to get oriented. Temple Mount, Dung Gate, okay? Do you see how Mount Zion, from this wonderful aerial shot, is right there? So this is what we're talking about. The original city wall would have gone down like this, across the valley, caught the pool of Siloam, and gone back up. So once again, you see what I'm doing? Center of the city. So we're talking about that right there. One more. I think this is the last one. This looks like the same, but it isn't. It's got a better angle to it in terms of this field that's completely open, owned by the Greek Orthodox Church. And then this is a restaurant, and the Essene Gate is right there. So our area, I say our area, where Gibson and I are digging, is right here, going up the hill to where you just saw. So this is what we're exposing. What are we likely to get in such a small area? Probably a priestly house. That's what we think. We think we've already found in 209, we didn't dig in 210 because we ran out of money basically with the recession. But in 209 was our last season. We're beginning to expose already the foundations of Herodian buildings. Buildings from the time of Jesus, from the time of Herod the Great. We pretty well expect it to be aristocratic. That is, who's living on the slopes of Mount Zion, because you're going to have this wonderful view of the temple. The rich and the famous, right? And particularly the priests. We're finding stone vessels, which shows indication of ritual purity. Murex shells. Do you know what murex shells are? The snails from which they get the purple dye to put on the tzitzit, called the tekelet. There's only been 2 ever found in Jerusalem until our dig. We've got over 24. So we're wondering, we might even be in the house of the priest that is manufacturing the blue dye, and you've got to have the blue dye to do anything in the temple. So it's quite interesting. But the most spectacular part of our dig so far, and it does relate to this whole Essene thing, so I'm throwing in an extra, but it's pretty amazing. This is what it looked like when it was found. The archaeologists never find anything. You know that? It's always the volunteers, right? So cleaning up debris, one of our volunteers goes, "Is this anything? Is it anything?" It's the only text ever found on a stone vessel. It is 10 lines. You have to turn it sideways. It goes like this. So if you turn it sideways. Israel Museum has already restored it. Raise your hand and say, what does it say? It's 10 lines of ancient Hebraic text. Hebraic, meaning it's not Greek and it's not Latin, it's some sort of Semitic letters. Stephen Fawn has deciphered, quite a large percentage of the Qumran texts are written in what's called Cryptic Hebrew. Are you aware of that? And this Cryptic Hebrew is purposely cryptic. You do all kinds of things. There's several strategies. You could use what's called atbash, where like an A would be a Z, and then a T would be a Y. It just kind of throws people off. And then you could, in the middle of, when you think you all got it, I got all 22 letters figured out, and now I can transcribe them, and then in the next line they'll switch and do it another way. See? Or they'll put letters backwards, or upside down, or things that we haven't even figured out yet. But codes can be cracked, right? I mean, if it's a logical text, if it is words with sequences, which it is, it can be deciphered, presumably. And Stephen Fawn is working on it. Everyone in Jerusalem has looked at this. Someone in the house we're digging, probably a priest, wrote on a stone cup some kind of message, and we're going to figure out what it is. 2 words have been deciphered. Jehovah, or Yod-He-Vav-He, Yahweh, Shavti. Jehovah, I have returned. So that's tantalizing, isn't it? That's clear. We're not sure what else it says. How does that relate to Mount Zion? Well, it shows you the Qumran connection. This script and this technique of writing is going to support Pixner's idea that, remember, the Essenes are a priestly group, right? They don't think the priests that run the temple are being clean enough, right? They're not following the proper rituals. Like according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, if I have a cup and I pour liquid from one to the other, okay, and one is clean and one is unclean, can the unclean travel up the stream, and this one's clean, this one's unclean, and I go like this, can it travel up the stream and make this one unclean? Priest of Jerusalem say no. Contamination is not spread that way. Essenes, yes. Meaning your whole temple ceremonies would not work. They would be defiled in the presence of God. Same with the toilets. There are toilets in Jerusalem. People have toilets in their homes. They need to be outside the city. That's what the Torah says, and so forth. And so this cup, once we are able to read it, I think will tell us more. Now, where Pixner got his clue was this description of Jerusalem in Josephus, Book 5 of Jewish War, where Josephus literally takes you around the walls of Jerusalem. He gives you a tour. He says, if you start at the Hippicus Tower, which you would see today as Jaffa Gate, what they call the Tower of David, okay? And you go east, you're going to reach the council house and the temple. That's along the north. If you then go south, you'll come to a place, same starting point, called Beit So. Literally, Beit, is house. So, it's Tzoah in Hebrew is basically like S-H-I-T. I won't say it, but the house of filth, house of defecation, to the gate of the Essenes, and then you turn facing south, but going east to the Pool of Siloam, and then back up again. So here's what he's saying. Up here would be the Tower of David. You come down around, there's Beit So, and then here's the Essene Gate, and then around the south. So here is the city we want to talk about. The Beit So, according to Pixner, are 2 mikvahs, see, it says ritual baths, and a little teeny hole in the ancient city wall that you can still see. So if he was right, the Essenes are just living in this little lip of the city. This is their gate where they can go in and out. And at night they could go out to relieve themselves into the Valley of Hinnom. You get that? The toilet is in hell. You go down in the Valley of Hinnom, it's defiled. Come back in, and when you come back in, you've got to dip yourself in the mikvah before you come back into the holy site. So Pixner's theory is not just a gate. I mean, whether this is the gate or not, you could argue all day. I'm going to get to that because Shimon Gibson says it isn't. But notice, even if you said Pixner's right or wrong about the gate, it's much more than a gate, because a gate would be a community. A community would be a whole understanding of ritual purity. If Jesus is allied with them, he has sympathetic friends within that priestly group and has a guest house where he eats the Last Supper. Remember, Mark says, go into the city, you'll see a man carrying a jug of water, presumably from the Pool of Siloam. Follow that man, and when he enters the city, so the man is apparently walking around the wall and entering the city. The first gate you come to is right here. It's the first place you could enter the city. So he comes around, enters the city, go into the building, the man enters, knock on the door, and say the teacher needs his room. That was the preparation of Jesus for the Passover. You follow? That was Pixner's theory. This is the building today. Up above is the upper room. Below is the tomb of David. This tomb of David is certainly a traditional site from the Middle Ages. I don't think any Jewish scholars think it's actually the tomb of David. But Josephus does have the tomb of David on Mount Zion, and this is pretty much at the center of Mount Zion. And so somewhere, if Josephus is right, the tomb of David was up in this area. But pious Jews visit the lower part, they go in, and the Christians are up on top, and the two groups usually don't mix, although some of the Christians also go in the tomb of David. What Pixner pointed out is that these stones right here are Herodian ashlars, either from the temple or from the walls, like the Western Wall, so-called Wailing Wall. And they've been reused after the destruction of Jerusalem to rebuild. What you would see here is the Herodian stones. And then you can see the later construction here, and then this is Crusader. So that's the building. According to Pixner, this building was preserved. Now you say, how could a rectangular first century building where Jesus ate the Last Supper, later where the church met for the day of Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, they're in the upper room. Holy Spirit comes upon them. It becomes the house of James because he's in charge of the movement when Jesus dies. Not Peter, sorry. Remember, James is the leader. Peter is glad to stand in the shadow of James. How could it possibly be preserved? The reason it's preserved is that in the Byzantine period, you have the Hagia Zion that Theodosius built, the Church of the Holy Zion, and next to it, almost like an artifact, is what is called the Church of the Apostles. So that when the Bordeaux pilgrim visits Jerusalem in the year what? 333 AD. He's our earliest account, right? He says, I walked from the Pool of Siloam up to Mount Zion, and there used to be 7 synagogues on Mount Zion before the Roman destruction. And now there's only one. He calls it the Little Church of the Apostles. So when the Christians came back from Pella and from, I think some of them at Masada, Jody spoke of Masada. I don't know if she put any Christians there. But remember, they're Jews. So we say Christians, meaning Jewish followers of Jesus. They scattered when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. They're allowed to come back. And they come back and they rebuild the church of Mount Zion. I got this infection in Israel 2 weeks ago, so it's holy. These are holy germs, and you just can't get rid of them. But anyway, so why would that be preserved? Because when the Church of St. Mary was built, there's no way this would exist for 2,000 years. But the Church of St. Mary, which is Crusader, they put the little building inside the church. You've seen this done in Europe in different places, where you go into a church and there's a grotto, right? And the church basically is protecting and memorializing almost like a show and tell artifact, which is the room of the Last Supper. Now it's Crusader, but the space is the same, according to Pixner. In other words, this goes back to this, which is getting us back to the 4th century, late 4th century, Theodosius, who built the Hagia Zion, and that would go back to the Bordeaux pilgrim, which is early 4th century, and then a couple of earlier accounts than that. The Greek property looks like this. That soccer field I was talking about, one building is showing here. Jim Strange and I have worked 2 different seasons doing radar ground scan back in the 90s and also mapping the area. But at the time, the Greek patriarch was not willing to let us dig. Now there's a new Greek patriarch, and the last time Shimon Gibson talked to him just this summer, he said, when are you going to dig? What are you waiting on? Well, we'd be waiting on probably about $1 million and a permit and a number of other things. But you talk about a grand site. I'd love you to come and dig at our little thing along the wall. It's pretty great. But imagine 8 or 10 or 20 or 30 squares laid out here. Some of you have been to digs. Wouldn't that be beautiful? And what we would find, this is right over the Essene Gate area, we would find what sort of people were living right up above the Essene Gate. We would know whether Pixner was right. If we find palatial mansions of aristocrats, I'm not so sure that's going to be the Essenes. That would be the rich priests. But I'm thinking they're more up on top. This is sort of on the lip, as you'll see. This is Father Pixner showing Jim Strange the 3 levels of the gate, and this lower level he identified as Herodian. So going down from basic, I think this is Byzantine, maybe this is Byzantine, I don't remember right now from the picture, but this lower level he's pointing to is Herodian. and some of you have seen that. It's all covered over now again. It's all washed in. The gate needs to be excavated. The Greek property needs to be laid out. How could I have missed pointing out to you, this is a covering, a modern concrete covering with iron bars, but look what's inside. This mikvah originally would have gone, see these steps? They've cut these steps. I say modern, like probably 1,000 years ago, but that's modern to me. But originally these steps, you've seen Qumran mikvahs where the wide steps go all the way across. This looks like the center aisle now. Those are the steps. See the steps right there? These are the original steps. This is a massive communal mikvah. So as Pixner said, he stood with me right there and he said, James, on the day of Pentecost, how many people were baptized? And I grew up in the Church of Christ. I can play Bible quiz all day. 3,000, sir. Acts 2, right? Verse 46 and 47. So where were they baptized? Was there somebody's little basement pool somewhere? Because you got to have thousands of people lined up. The Essenes have a communal mikvah. Here is Pixner's whole theory. Okay, the palace of Herod is going to be up here, but and he wouldn't know how each house looked, you understand. But you go in the gate, there he's got the mikvah, and there would be some kind of modest houses, and if we could dig, we would be digging this area right here, up there by Mount Zion. And then you've got the sewage channel, which is, let's see, number 5. Let me see where 5 is, right here. Coming out down into the valley, which is going to the side of the gate today, and then a road going in. So that's what Pixner called the Gate of the Essenes. This is still in situ right here. This and this, so you can see how wide the gate is. If you've ever gone in Damascus Gate, and you look to the left as you're going in, down below, you'll see a gate exactly like this, which is about 20 feet below the present level. That's where the city was in Herodian times. And that's the kind of gate. So the type of gate seems to fit. Now, Shimon Gibson has published an academic article saying Pixner's completely wrong. So here I'm getting on shaky ground, right? I'm talking about my colleague that I work with. And is he right or wrong in criticizing my late friend Bargil Pixner? He says he likes Pixner, of course. He knew him, he loved him, but he said, he lets his romanticism carry him away. That he can take you to the actual place where Jesus ate the Last Supper and where they baptized the 3,000 and, the Gate of the Essenes, that this is just it's not scientifically accurate. So Gibson has proposed a different gate for the Essene Gate. And he doesn't believe that this gate of Pixner's is even from the 1st century. He thinks it's late. Well, if it's late and from the Byzantine period, then obviously it can't be the Essene Gate. Because Josephus says you go south, you come to Beit So, and then you come to the Essene Gate. And in his popular book, I don't expect you to look up this one, but his popular book you can easily obtain, The Last Days of Jesus. You can buy it at SPL, you can buy it at ASOR, you can order it anywhere. He has a whole section giving his new theory. His theory would be, these are the kind of people who lived on Mount Zion, priestly mansions like this with courtyards, lovely living areas, much like you find near the Temple Mount. These houses would even be nicer, and that's the kind of house that we're digging in our little area by the wall. This is the kind of walls these people would have, frescoes. Not probably, Essenes are not going to go for this kind of thing. It's quasi-Greco-Roman, but you don't put human figures. So you're still being orthodox in terms of your decorations, but you're certainly having a nice place to live. So Gibson's convinced that Pixner's idea of a poor, humble little Essene community living on Mount Zion is incorrect. And actually, Jesus would have eaten the Last Supper in the lower city down by the Pool of Siloam, where the poor hung out. The poor, the diseased, the infirmed. He identifies with the lower classes. Pixner's theory is, he does identify with the lower classes, but he has connections with the upper classes. Who buries him? Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, they're part of the Sanhedrin. He has rich followers as well as poor followers. And when he needs a private place to meet with his disciples, he calls upon someone who owns property in the rich area of town who says, I prepared a room for the teacher. And that would be Pixner's argument back. I had an artist, Balage is the most wonderful artist for antiquity. Look him up on the web. It's Balage. He did 10 paintings for my Jesus Dynasty book. Unfortunately, only 2 of them were published in color. But I took him to Area E where we're digging. I said, okay, you're standing over a beautiful aristocratic house. Remove the Turkish wall. You'd be able to see the temple from your balcony as you drink your gin and tonics in the afternoon. And so this is what he drew me, you see. There's the temple, there's the Mount of Olives. Doesn't look like the Essene quarter, does it? So you see the conflict here. Now we can solve this, but we haven't yet. My conclusion is that Gibson is right about this gate, but that it's not the Essene gate. But what he discovered is more important than the Essene gate. Now, he hasn't heard me say this, and he would probably be disappointed that I don't agree with him. But I've thought about this a lot, and we'll talk about it. But along the western wall of Jerusalem, here's the Jaffa Gate, City of David, going down, this beautiful, I don't mean the western wall where people pray. This is the city wall that faces the King David Hotel, right? It's a beautiful city wall. They light it up at night. It's what you always see as a tourist. Oh, Jerusalem's so beautiful. Look, the Tower of David and the wall. Okay, in the 70s, there was soil all the way up to here. And the road didn't even exist. They're just building the road, and there's the road down below. So this was excavated by Broshi. Shimon was just a kid. He was he was a teenager, a little older, and he said he used to eat his lunch and put it up in one of the little, those Crusader niches where they shoot the arrows out of the slits. He'd put his lunch there and eat his lunch and then come down and dig. They used bulldozers and other kinds of methods. And they uncovered this whole wall, and lo and behold, a new gate that had never been known did in fact appear. And according to Josephus, if you leave the Tower of David and go south, you come to Beit So and then the Essene Gate. So Gibson's going to have the Essene Gate right here. His theory is, well, first of all, Beit So is a drainage tunnel, according to him, that is right about here. Much, and Pixner's got it way down here, see? So he's got a drainage tunnel and a gate. Pixner's got a drainage tunnel and a gate. You see what we're talking about? So which is right? This was never known before. Right behind, this wall is in the correct place for the time of Jesus as well. If you've ever looked at that wall carefully, the bottom stones are Herodian. A lot of them, it's bedrock. It doesn't move. As you'll see, Herodian stones still in place. So this is the wall in the time of Jesus. This turn here is much later. The original wall went on down and around, and this has been excavated recently right here. So this is Gibson's Beit So. It's a sewer tunnel coming out of the Tower of David. Drainage ditch going into the valley. So he says, I got a Beit So too, and I got a gate. So my gate's the gate of the Essenes. The sewage tunnel would be right about here. Here's his gate. See those steps going up? I call these the steps to nowhere. You're going to walk up these steps, and you're going to go into a wall. And there's no gate, because this was built later by the Crusaders and the Turks. But what's behind the wall? This is the Armenian parking lot. Look at this. Also, no buildings on it. In Jesus' time, this is Herod's palace. Now, isn't it let's don't tell anybody outside of the room, but here's a parking lot with just mounds of dirt pushed up to make the parking lot. So this would all have to be taken out. There's nothing built here. This needs to be all bulldozed out and sifted. It should be what Barkai's doing with the soil coming out from under the Temple Mount? Because you wouldn't want to take this much Jerusalem soil out in trucks. You truck it out. You're not going to dig it. It's been bulldozed up to make the parking lot. See? Here's the parking. This is paved. This all needs to be taken out and sifted because you're going to find lots of artifacts in the soil. And it'll be useful not to tell you anything about the soil, but just you don't want to throw away like 100 Herodian lamps and thousands of gold coins, right? It's going to be in the debris because it's ancient debris. So you sift it. That's going to be a huge project. It's going to cost a lot. Armenians are willing to let us do it. But when you cleared all this out and started digging right here, you would be digging the grounds of Herod's palace. Can you imagine this hasn't been done? This is Herod's palace. It's where Pontius Pilate is staying the night of Jesus' trial and crucifixion. And so let's go, here's a little closer view of the steps going up, but I wanted you to get an aerial shot of this platform. This is bedrock, and you can see how they've left this soil here just to show you how far up it was. This has all been exposed now. You can see the color's different. And these are Herodian. So these are original in situ from the first century. So is this, and so are these steps. Here is a beautiful painting of the palace, but look, no gate. So the artist didn't know there was a gate. And he's not up to date, but he had the palace, right? Here's the towers. This would be the palace. When Herod Antipas comes to town for Passover from the Galilee, he lives up at Sepphoris, right? He's going to come down and stay in Jerusalem. Where's he going to stay? In the barracks? I think Herod went to the Fortress Antonio. Fortress Antonio is where the troops stay. It's to guard the temple. You're on guard duty. You stay at the Antonio Fortress. Pontius Pilate prefers to be in Caesarea. You've been there, some of you. You know why. I mean, the Mediterranean, the Hippodrome, Herod the Great built this beautiful city, or Tiberias on the lake. He doesn't really want to be in Jerusalem much, does he? But for Passover, he's got to be in Jerusalem. Where's he going to stay? He's going to stay in the royal palace. So Pontius Pilate is not over here. I know some of you might be attached to the Via Dolorosa. It starts where Antonio Fortress was. Remember, Echo Homo, behold the man. That's assuming the governor of Judea is sleeping in the barracks with his wife, according to Matthew. So he and his wife are sleeping in the barracks. They have a palace right here, but they don't use it. It makes no sense. Now, this makes perfect sense. They're staying in the palace. Pilate, I don't know which side Herod had and what side palace, but Josephus describes it. It's got gardens and fountains and peacocks running around and mosaics, and it's going to be fabulous when we excavate it. But the temple model that's now at the Israel Museum, it used to be the Holy Land Hotel, they haven't here's the palace, they've got the palace. How do you get into the palace? According to this, there's no way in from the west side. You'd have to go into Jaffa Gate, come around this way. It does make sense that there would be a gate. I had Balazs draw it, and look, suddenly I got a road and a gate going right into the palace grounds. Isn't that nice? And the Essene quarter then would be down on the lip of the city. So I don't think that that Gibson's theory has to conflict with Pixner's theory. I just don't think this is the Essene gate. I think this is the gate into the palace. Now, why is that significant? These are Herodian steps. These are steps from the time of Jesus. You go up these steps, you go up. This is the gate. I know you probably can't tell from a distance, but these are Herodian stones in place. These are steps going up into the palace. This is what's called a bema, or a platform. There's a close-up of it, where Pilate would have had his judgment seat. Now, the Gospel of John, many scholars say the Gospel of John is very late. It's full of all sorts of theology, which it certainly is. You have a guy talking like, I am the light, and in me is no darkness, and if you walk in the light, you will be enlightened, and you will not be dark. And that doesn't sound like Jesus of the Synoptics. We know that. Sounds like John, 1 John, same language, right? But the framework of the Gospel of John, the details that he knows, particularly about the last days of Jesus, the arrest, the trial, crucifixion. He knows all sorts of things that Mark doesn't have a clue about. Like how did Peter and the beloved disciple get into the high priest's court? According to John, well, the beloved disciple knew the woman who tends the gate. Now, Bart would say, Bart's gone now, so I can reference it. Bart would say, Tabor, you made all that up just to make it sound authentic. I'm not so sure, because every time we can check it, it seems to be written by someone who kind of knows what's going on that week. For example, look at this gate. The crowds are outside and will not come into the praetorium because they've already gone to the mikvah for the Passover to eat that night. You say it's Friday morning, I say it's Thursday morning. So Good Thursday, not Good Friday, because I think it was on Thursday. But they're going to eat Passover that night, whether it's Thursday or Friday, right? So to kill somebody that morning, you've got to move fast. And this is in the middle of the night. They're waiting outside for Pilate to get up. They've already had a illegal meeting of the Sanhedrin in the priest's house. That's not where the Sanhedrin's supposed to be meeting. This is a bunch of people that they've already got the vote set. It's like our Congress, you know. They already know what the vote's going to be before they take it. They've lobbed, and they go, we're going to kick in this guy. We're calling Joe and Bill and Pete together, and we're going to vote. So he's already been condemned by Annas the priest and Caiaphas, right? And then they take him to Pontius Pilate, and at the crack of dawn, Pontius Pilate comes out, according to John. He walks out of his palace, and 3 times he goes back in and back out. And finally, Jesus, this is Balaja, there's Jesus, there's the gate, and Pontius Pilate would be up on the platform, and the soldiers guarding, and the people down below saying, you know, let us have him. So that would be Gibson's theory. I think he's right on that. This is the place of the trial of Jesus. I don't have any doubt about it. It's not in the city at the Church of St. Anne. That's the Antonio Fortress Barracks. This makes perfect sense. Nobody goes here. If you're a Christian, this is about the holiest site you could go to, because you're standing at the place where Jesus was condemned. So it's pretty moving to go there. But it doesn't have to be the Essene Gate. Now, why does Gibson think it's the Essene Gate? Because it's the first gate going down, you know, according to Josephus' description, and he doesn't think the other gate is first century. So all that's not resolved yet. But I would suggest that Josephus is not counting this as a gate into the city, but it's an entranceway into the palace. So I don't think it's likely the Essene Gate. And why would you call it the Essene Gate? Gibson says because the Essenes don't live in the city, they live outdoors on the slopes over the Hinnom Valley. They're camping because they think the city's defiled. And his argument is that gates always go towards something. Damascus Gate goes to Damascus. Jaffa Gate to Jaffa. Essene Gate to the Essenes. Sounds like a good argument, and it could be, except if the Essene Gate is named because it's the gate they come out of to go to the toilet, you could see how it would also get the name the Essene Gate. Not because it's going out to them, because they're going out through their gate to relieve themselves several times a day, I would think. You know, they're going to have Essenes continually going in and out of the gate, except on Shabbat when the gate is closed. And then what do you do? Well, so I think that, did you say I had like 5 minutes left or 10? You were signaling me back there. 10, okay, because we got to have questions. So here's how I would put it together. I'm willing to go with Pixner on the other gate, being the Essene Gate, but then I think Gibson's discovery and identification of this as the, and I think almost everybody agrees now, that this is the Praetorium, the judgment seat, Gabbatha mentioned, the pavement. It's the right place, but it's not necessarily the Essene Gate. So I think, you know, I'm not trying to agree with both, but I end up agreeing with both. I still think Pixner, we're far from ready to give up his whole idea. I was talking to Danny Bahat. I call Danny Mr. Jerusalem. He probably knows more about Jerusalem than anybody on the face of the earth, except for Gibson. But Danny's older, so we'll go with Danny. And I said, are you willing to give up Pixner's theory? He says, no way. He says he's convinced still that Pixner's theory about the gate is correct. So what do we need to do? We need to finish our dig on the little lip where we're digging. We need to move up to the Greek property, move into the Armenian property, and redig the gate. And I think we'll be able to explain this whole area. And I think it's going to be very, very interesting for both Jews and Christians to recover Mount Zion, the highest point of the city. And what was it in the time of Herod the Great, in the time of Jesus? And is it in fact maybe more sacred than the Via Dolorosa?